So, what did I say? I said I'm playing Elder Scrolls Online and World of Warcraft right now, so why are you looking at Guild Wars 2? I said I might do a video talking about why I quit Guild Wars 2, so I am doing that now. But that's not why I downloaded Guild Wars 2, which I will get to. Guild Wars 2 was one of my favorite games I ever played. It has a really good combat system that felt good. It had, a world that felt fun to explore. It is a place where I have some amazing gaming memories, some of my favorite gaming memories I've ever made in any game. I met both my spouse and my girlfriend in Guild Wars 2. I've got people who are still my friends to this day that I made friends with them in Guild Wars 2. So you might be like, well, what? Why did you delete the game and stop playing 3 years ago then? And yeah, it's actually been 3 years. I logged into the game for about an hour about 2 years ago, a year and 10 months according to the login timer, and kind of tried one of the new parts to the New Living Story for a couple of minutes, decided I couldn't handle it and logged back out and didn't try it again for almost 2 years, like full. So yeah, why Guild Wars 2? I downloaded it last night mostly for nostalgia's sake, but also because I'm frustrated with the state of MMORPGs in general, and this game, when I think about what was the most casual MMORPG I ever played in my life, it was this game. So I re-downloaded it, and of course there was my cute little characters still looking like how when I first got them. But it's also a little bit difficult because there's some negative humps to get over, and I feel like maybe if I talk about them, maybe it'll help me have a better experience just coming to try some casualness. I do want to flat out be clear, I don't intend at all to quit World of Warcraft or Elder Scrolls Online. I just want a filler game for when I'm not in the mood for either of them. And Guild Wars 2 is great for that kind of thing. Back in the day, I quit Guild Wars 2 for several reasons combined. It was not just one thing that made me quit. The external thing, the thing that was not Guild Wars 2's fault, the game had nothing to do with it, ArenaNet had nothing to do with it, was that I had been part of an LGBT plus community that played the game and had an online, server for like support and helping people in the LGBT plus community in general. It was very fulfilling to volunteer time to talking to people and trying to be there for people and stuff. I love doing that. I've always loved that kind of thing. But when we first joined the guild, we didn't intend to get involved in any of that aspect. We were just looking for a guild in Guild Wars 2, and my spouse and I spent almost a year when we first joined in not really getting super involved in stuff. But we made some friends, and the guild leader at the time was stepping away and giving the guild to two younger folks, one of whom had basically been running the guild anyway. And I got in a chat, and I can remember where I was in the game when he gave me this chat, but he basically was this young gay guy who was full of sass and a little gangster sometimes in his attitudes, but he was so full of plans and charisma. And he was talking about how excited he was at the prospect of the older person stepping away and him being able to have the guild, and how much work he had put in for years into the guild, and how excited he was that it would finally be where he had no limitations on what he could do with it. And he was talking about the kind of support systems he wanted. He was talking about how there wouldn't be any bullshit with tiptoeing around people who were, you know, too extreme in their demands of other, you know, LGBT plus people to be like too stringently pushy about like what you're allowed to say or do, which sometimes people in the LGBT plus community can be very. You can't make a video about pride flags without a whole ton of people going on about, oh, you missed this one, or oh, you missed this one, or oh, you missed this one. Like, you can't make a comment about, you know, asexuals anymore without including all of the different types of subcategories. You can't just say, hey, I'm this thing. You have to say, yes, but also what's the extra terms that you add on. It can be progressive in the way that we think, but it also can be very demanding in trying to keep up with the constant change in terminology. And he didn't want it to look that. He wanted it to be chill. He wanted it to be a place where people could come to make friends, relax, create genuine friendships, and also when they're having a shitty time, have a support channel, have a place to go to and stuff. And he wanted it to be a place that was, you know, something for everybody in the LGBT plus community, and he wanted it to be specifically for them. And it wasn't a dating site, but a lot of people did end up dating and stuff, and that was okay, but it wasn't for that. It was for helping people. And like the way that he described it and the way that he explained it and stuff just really was inspiring to me. It captured my imagination, and I said, hey, I'm in full support. I will help you any way I can, all that stuff. So before the old officer was even for sure giving up the guild to him, I got made an officer. I had been an officer for only a couple of days when unfortunately something happened, and I didn't know the other officers that well. I didn't know the situation that well. I didn't know what was going on that well, but all the other officers banded around an officer that was involved, and I was like, okay, so cool. That sounds, you know, reasonable or whatever, because I didn't know, and they all seemed like they were being reasonable about it. I then, you know, thought we were being reasonable and stuff, and some guildies were very panicked and worried about it, and I told them, don't worry, we're being reasonable. Well, then the very next day, the person who wasn't an officer got immediately kicked, and a bunch of people left the guild over it. They felt like the officers were basically pandering to another officer and that things were unfair and all this stuff. So I became the person to clean up the mess. I don't think that it was intended that that would happen, but no one else wanted the job. All the other officers, I very, very quickly realized, didn't really log in. And if they did log in, they didn't really talk. They weren't social with the guildies that much. They just usually didn't log in. And I was on every single day. I was there, so I became the person to try to calm people down, talk people out of leaving, try to explain what happened. I took screenshots of everything. I made a big giant compilation of files and folders to explain what happened to people who were upset with permission from the other officers, but they didn't want to do it, so I did it. And I managed to hold together a whole bunch of guildies, and without meaning to, I garnered a bunch of respect from a bunch of guildies for that. And I very rapidly went from being a junior officer to a full-blown officer. Well, then the older guild leader decided to go ahead and pass on the lead to the younger two. This was a big celebrated thing. This was exciting. I was super for it. But one of the two was the guy that inspired me, and one of the two was the officer who had been involved in the other situation. And again, I had to deal with, quietly as I could, the considered conflict of interest. This second officer was considered to get away with crap that no one else in the guild seemed to be able to get away with, and now was going to be a guild leader. And there were people who were genuinely afraid that they would just end up kicked if this person got pissy with them or irritated by them. And I was like, no, that's not going to happen. And for a while, that was proven true, because almost immediately after they gained guild leadership, they stopped being as available. Now, he had real life stuff going on, was communicative about it, let me know, and I was like, okay, I'll step in, I'll do my best. She just disappeared, the second person. So no word to anybody at all. Didn't explain anything, didn't communicate, just dropped the entire guild, the entire community, the entire outside the game community, everything just disappeared. So then I became like this third place in charge person or something, with another person who hardly logged in, and we were considered to be the quote-unquote officers in charge. And I would try to throw things by the guy that I felt that I was following. I felt like he was the leader, and I was doing everything I could to follow his original vision. And the guild for a while thrived. We were having, events, we were having raffles, we were having tons of social stuff going on. We were part of the in-game pride, which Guild Wars 2 does have an in-game pride, where they actually walk across Tyria in a big giant parade and shit. We were part of all this stuff, and they already had been part of the pride thing. But I mean, we got so many people involved that they kept having to start more and more maps and stuff, because there was just too many people, and we had game devs walking with our guild because they were so excited by our guild and what we were doing and stuff. And it was fulfilling, and it was fun, and it was nice, but it was also a lot of stress. And I also was trying to take care of my spouse, who was getting sicker and sicker, and we met our girlfriend, and we were trying to deal with, are we going to become poly, and what's going on with that relationship. And a bunch of us had mutual friends, and the mutual friends wanted to be involved in our relationship, and we tried to stay, where we were being social with people and not just, oh, we're falling in love, so obviously no one else exists. We tried really hard not to do that. Every once in a while, the guild leader, the young man, he would come back, and every single time, we would be super excited. All the guildies would get together and celebrate that he could come back, that real life stuff wasn't in the way for a little while. And I always was like, I'm here to, help you. And I thought, he and I were friends and stuff. So I was very, very involved in all of this. And what changed is the second person, she came back. And when she came back, it was like everything disappeared. When she disappeared, everyone was hurt, everyone was upset. She wouldn't communicate. The guild leader and I and others of her friends who were in the guild and stuff, and people in the social community, even if they weren't still in Guild Wars 2, they were all reaching out to her. People reached out to her in every method under the sun, and she just wouldn't respond to anybody, just disappeared and left. And everyone was upset. But as soon as she came back, it was immediately right back to she could get away with anything. And in the interim, when she had been gone, there had been like this really structured system set in place for officers and for rules and things like that and stuff, and the way that we treat guildies and we uphold things and stuff. And right before she came back, an officer basically kicked a guildie when the officer had incited the guildie to being upset. And it is a guildie that we had had some issues with there being drama around them in the past. But in this particular situation, the officer was definitely the one pushing the aggression. And I was ashamed. So I flat out said, this isn't how officers work. That's not what we do. So we invited that person back. Well, that person happened to be someone that this second guild leader person, she didn't like the guild member. So she came back right after this person had been invited back because of the way that they had been kicked, with a warning that if they did anything at all, they would be kicked correctly. And she was pissed off that that person was still in the guild. She was hoping that they wouldn't be around anymore. She was irritated by like restrictions and rules that we had put in place about things like nudity or influencing others toward unhealthy behavior. And we had set in place, guidelines for talking about suicide, talking about, sex addictions, talking about, a lot of our disorders in open public guild chats, and instead putting them in support chats that were out of the game. Some of those support chats, were fine to talk about stuff like that, and then some of it was just like pictures channel, and it'd be like, oh hey, I'm gonna post a nude. Okay, now that everyone's seen it, I'm gonna take it down real quick. I only left it up for a short time, so obviously it's okay. There were things like this going on, and it's one of the guild leaders. And I would go to the guild leader that I felt I was supporting, and he would be like, oh, she's fine. Oh, just leave it alone. And I don't know if he was scared she would just leave again. I don't know if he was because he was unable to log in that much, just really unaware of how much it was happening or what. But she started putting people in charge that were different than the people he had been putting in charge. And a mentality shift in the officers started to happen. And there started to be this clique. And instead of every rule in the guild applying to every single guildie, no matter your rank, it became that officers could sort of just bend the rules and do whatever they felt like, and the guildies sort of just had to deal with it. And there were less people coming to social stuff, there was less happening that way, and I couldn't do anything about it because my spouse's health was getting worse and worse. And the stress of trying to be there when my spouse's health was so bad got to a point where I flat out had to step down from being the third highest. I actually for a short time got promoted to being a co-guild leader for a very, very short time, but I stepped down pretty quickly back down to being an officer because of real life. And then we started getting ready to move, and I had to deal with all of that stuff. I had emotionally shut down. I felt like I was doomed. Our girlfriend, when we started dating her openly, a whole bunch of girls in the guild came forward and were like, oh, I was secretly in love with you or whatever. And I was like, where is this coming from? Like, why did this happen? Like, a bunch of them. it was kind of ridiculous, the sheer volume of girls who came forward and was like, oh, I've had a crush on you for forever, and now you're dating her, and she ain't good for you. You know, this relationship's not gonna last, blah, 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 because they were like, oh no, you should be in a relationship with me instead. And that was frustrating, and it was just overall difficult, but I stepped back from being an officer, and the officers just kept getting more and more toxic. And finally, a big group of officers left together because they were complaining as a unit. They petitioned as a unit for this to stop and for the girl guild leader to not be in a position of authority anymore. And the guy, guild leader, who we all supported and we all thought was a good guild leader for the most part, except that he didn't log in a lot, he said no to all of them and decided that they were all undermining him and that they were all against him and that they were all trying to like take over the guild or something. And so they all left. And the only guildy officers left were the toxic ones. And it culminated in my spouse's health was bad again, and I didn't have time to put into this game. My freaking real life, I was selling everything I owned in yard sales, donating everything I owned that wouldn't sell in a yard sale, getting rid of everything, just throwing sheer volumes of stuff away, trying to get ready to move across the entire country. I was doing all this work and just trying not to completely fall apart in real life. And honestly, if we hadn't been in a fresh relationship with our girlfriend to some degree, I'm pretty sure I would have just not made it through that entire ordeal. But they finally, had this thing where there was a rule about how things were supposed to happen, and they flat out blatantly disregarded the rule. And when they did that, it involved my spouse. And my spouse is autistic. She was extremely low lucidity at that point, and she couldn't understand why this was happening to her. And it was one of the people that she trusted and thought was her friend. But even besides that, he knew how important what he was doing to her was to her. And she didn't understand. And I was like, there's a toxicity in the officers. It's not your fault. He's not trying to do anything against you. It's become acceptable to treat people this way. And I tried really hard to just explain to the guild leader. I made a message to the officers. I did not complain to any guildie at all. I never tried to undermine anyone. And basically got accused of trying to undermine the guild and got accused of essentially having been trying to undermine the guild the entire time, and there was this giant conspiracy theory and blah blah blah. There was a big long tirade of backlash and people blocking me and stuff like that. And I was like, yes, it sucks that it was my spouse that this just happened to, but I would be upset if this happened to anyone. And they were just like, fine, quit the game over an item. And that's not what it was. We didn't quit the game immediately. We left that community. We tried to still keep playing, but there was a lot of negative feelings about it. My spouse could not log into the game without bawling her eyes out. So it became extremely difficult for her. A bunch of her friends stopped being her friends. One of her best friends had ripped her heart out because he had embraced the officer mentality of rules don't matter, and she's autistic, rules matter to her. And embraced the mentality of the officers are in a clique. They got each other's backs, not the guild's backs. It stopped being about that vision for the guild and for the community that the guild was based on, and it became this other thing entirely. And the original vision that he laid out, even years later, even, I don't know if that guild even still exists, freaking still believe in it. And there were people who were like, after we went, like the guild started falling apart and people would check on it every once in a while and stuff and try to tell us like it would be something that would make us happy that the guild was dead. That doesn't make me happy. That makes me sad. I don't know why people thought it would be like exciting to tell me that or whatever. I think most people are more vindictive than I am. I don't know. They thought it would be like validating or something that the toxic officer mentality really did kill the guild, and I don't know, they wanted me to be right or to feel like I was right or something, but I would much rather that they would have learned from it and been super successful after we left, and it was like this impactful thing that they made the community 10 times stronger. I would much rather that. Because what we had made for a while there was like one of the most positive LGBT plus communities I've ever been in. It was just really, really sad. We did try to keep playing, but the other problem was I've played for a very long time. Guild Wars 2 is a game that I've had since the launch, and I stopped playing a couple of times because I'd get mad at something, but then I'd always come back. This game is awesome for new players. There are thousands upon thousands of hours of content in this game if you're new. But when you're max level, it can get kind of repetitive because there's not the same sort of progression systems as there are in other games. I was getting to where it felt like a chore to log in, and so I was like, well, I don't want to log in if it's a chore. And that negativity from my spouse not wanting to play it, from, you know, everything that went down, from real life and my spouse being so ill, and again, we were trying to get ready to move. Our girlfriend was struggling with school stuff. I found out that she had some issues that she had been lying to me about. I mean, there was just so many compounding things that went on that made us stop playing Guild Wars 2. And it's sad because this still was one of the best games I ever played. I mean, again, I met both my spouse and our girlfriend playing this game. Like, the earliest parts of my relationship with both women was playing with each other and being flirty with our little characters and being sweet on each other. And there are locations in this game that when I walk up to them, they still take my breath away. I went and did the Siren's Landing jumping puzzle yesterday, and I still got that good feeling where you're jumping out onto that plank and you're so high up, you're like, don't fall, don't fall, don't fall. Yes, I made it. And you know, you get that sense of, oh gosh, I could slip at any minute, and then I have to jump back all this again. And that's the only punishment, is having to re-jump it, and yet it feels good. I only intend to play this casually. I play ESO decently casually as well, but I've been finding myself basically doing some of the same stuff over and over again in ESO, not because it's chores, but because I don't play with any progression groups of people, because I already do that in World of Warcraft and I can't do that in more than one game. So I go exploring and I find sky shards and lore books. I level up ults. I love my characters in Elder Scrolls Online and stuff a lot, but like I get, after about an hour or so, I get kind of like, I'm ready to log off on ESO. I'm having trouble wanting to load into World of Warcraft at all, except at night for our guild events, which we have guild events every single night, so for a couple of hours. But like, I'm supposed to be like getting my rogue more and more ready for farming for the Awakened mount and stuff, and it's just like, sometimes you get so sick of progression. It's just a non-stop grind. And this game is, oh, you're bored? Here's this other fun thing to do. Oh, here's a different option. Oh, you're sick of running around exploring the world? Well, go talk to the little game person and maybe you can go play, you know, barrel toss, or you can go roll around trying to get a little crab while giant Karka crabs roll around and try to destroy you. You know, there's always some extra little tidbit of something to do in this game. And yes, there are some negative things, like that if you finally do get to the very end of the content, the only thing really to do is to collect, because there's not a real progression system, and that means that it can be hard for veteran players, and you know, is what it is with that. And yes, you spend a lot of time in this game managing your inventory, but so do you in ESO, so do you in World of Warcraft. It seems to just be kind of an MMORPG thing in general, in my experience. You might a little more than usual in this game. Like, you can't do anything without immediately afterwards having to salvage stuff, but you know. It's also adorable, and it also has a lot of memories. Honestly, I think if all that stuff hadn't happened, I would have realized I was trans sooner. I had started making... I thought the first boy characters I ever made in any game was Elder Scrolls Online, but actually, in this game, I made a little Asura who technically was a girl, but in every way, shape, and form looked like a boy. And it was my first attempt at making a guy in a game, and I loved this character so freaking much. Like, absolutely loved this character. And I mean, I did have this pretty butchy girl, but, you know, she was more of a butchy lesbian. Whereas this one right here, this was my little boy. And I would say, oh, it's my little non-binary boy. Because I didn't feel comfortable saying, oh, I actually want a boy character. I didn't feel comfortable actually being like that. But at the same time, like, this was my first attempt to, like, do that and it be okay, because it's just in a game and no one has to know that I made a little boy character, and it can be my secret little thing. And if I hadn't stopped playing Guild Wars 2 and the LGBT plus community that I had been in, like a bunch of my friends were trans and stuff, if I had stayed longer in that community, I can pretty much guarantee that I would have come out as trans sooner. So that's sad. But at the same time, there was just so much happening between the real life stuff, the guild stuff, and the frustration with not enough to do because I was a veteran player. And I was playing it hardcore. And I feel like this game isn't meant to be played hardcore. This is meant to be the casual game that you play for like an hour and then you log out. Or, you know, you maybe you have a full-time job and you have kids, and when you finally can get some time to play, you don't have a lot of time. So you want to get the most out of that time. This is the game for that. And accepting it for what it is makes it a lot easier to come back and try it out again. It's very nostalgic being logged into this game. And I haven't seen anybody from the old community and stuff. I don't know if the guild actually fully died or if they just... I have no idea. I don't care. I know the online community is probably completely gone, and that makes me so sad, because the LGBT plus community needs more supportive communities like that. Like, it really does, just in general. And it was such a good place. I feel like a lot of the things that we do with the guild in World of Warcraft now reflects some of the things that we did in that guild, except we don't have any support systems for people, but we have a lot of really positive things going on. And a lot of them are reflective of the positive things that we used to have going on in Guild Wars 2. And that makes me happy. That makes me feel a little less crappy about it. But yeah, that's why we picked Guild Wars 2, is lots of things. And I haven't played it in years. I have a lot of story content to push through and zones to go explore. Goodness, they've added 8 maps since I've played, and it looks like 2 raids maybe. I don't even know. Like, there's a lot that is missing on my map for my little girl. But that's good. That's exciting. That means if I'm playing it casually, I'll be able to play it in the background every once in a while whenever I feel like, without any issue. Also, since there's no subscriptions in this game, if I don't play it in a day, not a big deal. You know, it's not important. You know, I haven't played this game in years, haven't put any money into it for all these years, and yet here's my character and all my stuff, just like, well, all my characters and all my stuff. Just like I haven't stopped playing it at all, except for that I don't have all this story content. But I mean, everything's still good and functional and here to go and stay. And that's a nice thing about Guild Wars 2. You never have to feel like you have to invest back into it to be able to come back. I don't know. I have a lot of mixed feelings about Guild Wars 2, but for the most part, I'm pretty glad. But I mean,